I never imagined my time at Meridian Technologies would end like this. After 33 years of blood, sweat, and late nights spent building what became the heart of the company's success. But there I was, on a gray Monday morning, walking into a sterile, glass-walled boardroom. Summoned not for a celebration or a project review, but for something that felt like a final verdict. My palms were steady, but my mind was racing with all the moments that had led me here. It was the kind of place where the air felt thick with unspoken decisions, cold, calculated, and utterly impersonal. The new CEO, Michael Trent, sat behind the polished mahogany table, flanked by a handful of his newly assembled executive team. I recognized maybe one or two faces from corporate events, but mostly it was a sea of unfamiliar suits, fresh talent hired to reshape Meridian's future. Michael didn't waste time. "James," he said, his voice clipped and formal, "we appreciate your decades of service, but the board has made the decision to eliminate your position effective immediately. This is part of a broader strategic realignment to focus on new technology platforms. Effective immediately." The words echoed in my head like a cold gust of wind. No warnings, no transition plan, no thank you for building the flagship software that had generated millions in revenue over the years. I swallowed hard, but maintained my composure. I knew better than to let my emotions show in a room full of people who already seemed to view me as a relic of a bygone era. "May I ask," I replied steadily, "what exactly does this new strategy involve? And how does my work no longer fit within it?" Michael shifted uncomfortably, avoiding my gaze. "We're moving aggressively into cloud-based solutions and modular software architectures. The old monolithic systems aren't agile enough for our future goals. Your team's work was invaluable in its time, but we need fresh talent with new skill sets." I nodded slowly. I'd heard this kind of corporate doublespeak before. It was the language of obsolescence disguised as progress, and I wasn't surprised, honestly. Ever since Michael was hired 18 months ago, it was clear the company was shifting priorities, and not in my favor. Over the past year, I had watched as key senior engineers were pushed out or sidelined, replaced by younger, less experienced hires brought in at lower salaries. The once tight-knit product development team had fractured, and the culture I'd helped nurture was unraveling. Yet I held hope that my decades of deep knowledge and leadership would shield me, until now. What made the sting worse was what I had uncovered quietly during those months of change. While the company was publicly touting innovation, behind closed doors, executives were pushing to claim my patented enhancements to Meridian's core software as company property, without proper legal attribution or credit to me. The patent office filings were being delayed, documentation was being buried, and the legal team was frustratingly slow to recognize my intellectual property rights. I had spent countless nights at my home office after hours, meticulously documenting my inventions, filing provisional patents, and archiving code repositories, efforts I'd undertaken with my own money and time precisely because I foresaw this moment. I didn't want to be left empty-handed if the company decided to cut ties. Now, it seemed that foresight had saved me from being completely blindsided. The conversation in that boardroom was clinical, devoid of any acknowledgement of my contributions or the human element behind my work. There was no gratitude for the long nights troubleshooting production issues, the mentoring of younger engineers, or the countless presentations to investors and clients where I had been the face of Meridian's technology. When the meeting concluded, I was handed a formal termination letter, along with a severance package, standard, nothing extraordinary. No offer to consult, no attempt to keep me on board in any capacity. It was a stark reminder that, in the corporate world, loyalty only goes so far. As I walked out of that boardroom, I passed the new recruits, young professionals with eager eyes who had no idea what I had built or the battles I'd fought. I caught a glimpse of a few smirks as if thinking, "Old man, time to retire." But I knew better. I had weathered worse storms than this. Back in my office, I sat down at my desk, the familiar hum of the computers feeling suddenly foreign. Photos of my family, awards from industry events, and framed letters from satisfied clients stared back at me. I thought about my wife, Linda, who had stood by me through the ups and downs, and my two kids who were now grown and carving their own paths. I didn't feel defeated. Far from it. I'd prepared for this moment. Years ago, I had realized that in tech, no one's position is truly secure, not even mine. with my decades of experience. The writing had been on the wall the day Michael was hired. It was time to take control of my own destiny. I carefully began to pack up my personal belongings, aware that in less than 24 hours, this office, this chapter of my life, would belong to someone else. But inside me, there was a quiet fire. This wasn't the end of the road. It was the fork in the path I had been steering toward all along. In those moments of packing, I reflected on the countless late nights, the innovation breakthroughs, the friendships, and the betrayals. It was a complicated legacy, but one thing was clear. I wasn't going to fade quietly into the background. I had a plan, and the next steps would prove to everyone that true innovation cannot be erased by a corporate memo or a boardroom vote. And so, with a final look around my office, I left Meridian Technologies, not just as a former employee, but as a man who had already begun to write the next chapter of his story. I've always believed that the quietest battles are fought in the shadows, long before anyone else even realizes there's a war. And that was exactly the approach I took in the years leading up to my unexpected dismissal from Meridian Technologies. I'd been there for over 3 decades, and during that time, I learned something crucial about corporate loyalty. It's conditional and often fleeting. No matter how much sweat, blood, and late nights you pour into a project, companies tend to value results over relationships. And when the winds of strategy shift, the most valuable assets, sometimes the very people who built the company's backbone, are the first to be cast aside. But I wasn't about to be just another casualty. I had sensed the subtle changes in the company culture and priorities well before I was called into that boardroom. The new CEO's focus on rapid growth and short-term gains, the increasing bureaucracy, the dwindling attention to innovation, those were all signs pointing to a storm brewing. So instead of reacting, I planned. The planning started modestly, a few extra hours after work here and there, jotting down ideas and notes. But gradually, it evolved into something much more serious. I turned a spare corner of my home into a private lab, away from prying eyes and corporate oversight. That cramped little space became my sanctuary, where I could work uninterrupted on improving Meridian's core technology without worrying about office politics or deadlines. I began by meticulously documenting every piece of code I wrote, every modification and optimization, and every problem solved. I kept notebooks filled with sketches, flowcharts, and technical explanations. I knew that having a well-documented history would be invaluable if anyone ever challenged my work or tried to claim it as theirs. The corporate environment often overlooks the importance of proper documentation, but to me, it was a fortress of protection. Then came the patents. I had always been aware of the importance of intellectual property. But as I watched the company's management become increasingly focused on control and consolidation, I realized I couldn't rely on them to protect what I had created. So, using my own savings, I retained one of the best patent attorneys in the city, a sharp, no-nonsense woman who understood software patents better than anyone I'd met. Together, we pored over every innovation and iteration I had made on the algorithm that powered Meridian's flagship product. We prepared patent applications that were airtight, leaving no room for ambiguity or legal loopholes. It was painstaking work, requiring patience and precision, but I knew that this was my insurance policy against the unknown. Each submission was like building a brick in a wall that would shield my career and my contributions from being erased or stolen. There were nights when I worked until the early hours, the glow of the desk lamp my only companion. My family knew these moments well. They respected that this was my mission, my way of ensuring that my decades of work wouldn't vanish into corporate oblivion. I'd often pause to look out the window at the quiet street, reflecting on how much I'd invested in Meridian and how little they seemed to value the people behind the technology. I also started creating encrypted backups of every version of the software I developed. These backups weren't just safety nets. They were evidence of the evolution and originality of my work. While the company's IT policies restricted access to certain internal systems, I made sure I had copies stored securely at home, separate from any corporate servers. I anticipated the possibility that if I was pushed out, replicating the technology wouldn't be as easy for the company as they might have assumed. What most people don't understand is how much of innovation happens in those quiet, solitary moments, away from meetings, presentations, and boardroom theatrics. Innovation demands focus and time, and I had learned to carve that time out, even if it meant working in the shadows. Beyond the technical preparation, I also cultivated relationships outside the company, mentors, former colleagues, and industry insiders who respected the integrity of my work. I shared with a select few the fact that I was safeguarding intellectual property and preparing for whatever might come. These conversations weren't about boasting. They were about creating a network of support and influence, so that if I ever parted ways with Meridian, I wouldn't be alone. Looking back, that period of quiet preparation was not just a defensive strategy. It was a declaration of self-worth. In a corporate culture that often treats people like disposable assets, I was taking control of my own narrative. I was setting the terms, quietly but firmly, that my contributions mattered and they would be recognized. When the dismissal letter finally arrived, it was a blow, no doubt. But it wasn't a surprise. And more importantly, it wasn't the end. Because by then, I had built something no one could easily take from me. A documented legacy, legal protections, and a roadmap for the future that was entirely my own. It's funny how people often see these quiet preparations as mere backups or second chances, but for me, they were the foundation of a comeback. I was no longer just an employee. I was a guardian of my own intellectual property and the architect of my next chapter. That late-night work under the desk lamp, so solitary and unremarkable at the time, was the most important investment I ever made. It turned what could have been a devastating dismissal into a powerful new beginning. When word got out that I was leaving Meridian Technologies, especially with the exclusive rights to that patented enhancement everyone thought was company property, it hit the company like a thunderclap. You'd think a place as big and entrenched as Meridian would have seen it coming. But no, the reaction was chaos in its purest form. I still remember the morning after the official announcement. I was already halfway settled at Titan Dynamics, but news feeds and calls kept flooding in. Internally, Meridian went into crisis mode almost instantly. Managers were scrambling to patch the narrative, putting out vague statements about organizational restructuring and new strategic focuses. But behind closed doors, the panic was palpable. Within days, key members of my former team were approaching me, not for goodbyes, but for advice on their next moves. I wasn't surprised. Losing your lead architect is one thing, but losing the person who secured the intellectual foundation beneath it, that was seismic. These were engineers, developers, and product managers who had spent years working alongside me, pushing the boundaries of what Meridian's technology could do. Now they were facing an uncertain future, unsure if the company could maintain its competitive edge without the very algorithm that had fueled its success. I heard from several of them that internal morale was tanking. Rumors of layoffs spread like wildfire, with whispers about a possible tech overhaul that would strip away entire divisions. The atmosphere in the office, once buzzing with collaboration, had shifted to a tense silence, broken only by hurried meetings and closed-door discussions. I felt a mix of guilt and inevitability watching it unfold, knowing that this was the fallout of a leadership blinded by short-term thinking. The financial markets reacted swiftly too. Meridian stock, which had been relatively stable, started to slide as analysts and investors digested the implications of losing the patented tech and its chief innovator. The stock ticker on financial news channels was a grim reminder of how much faith the market had lost overnight. Shareholders were questioning the company's future and whether its management truly understood the value of innovation and intellectual property. The company's PR team tried to spin the story, claiming that they were fully committed to innovation and long-term growth, and that internal talent pipelines were strong. But those reassurances rang hollow. Clients began to ask tough questions during contract renewals, wary of whether Meridian could continue to deliver on promises backed by technology now in legal dispute. Legal teams on both sides started digging in. Meridian's lawyers launched reviews of the patent filings and the contracts, looking for any leverage to dispute the validity of my claims. At the same time, they tried to delay negotiations, hoping to buy time to develop a workaround or even a replacement algorithm. But that wasn't a simple task. The depth and sophistication of the technology I'd built weren't something you could replicate overnight. Perhaps the most telling sign of Meridian's internal struggle was the resignation letter that circulated just 2 weeks after my departure. It was from one of the senior engineers, a longtime collaborator, who cited the uncertainty surrounding the company's direction and loss of leadership as reasons for leaving. That letter was just the beginning. Within a month, several others followed suit, many joining me at Titan Dynamics or other competitors who valued their expertise. The talent drain was devastating. Losing key personnel meant Meridian not only lost knowledge and experience, but also momentum. Projects stalled, deadlines slipped, and the competitive edge they had spent years sharpening began to dull. Meanwhile, Titan Dynamics was quietly gaining ground, welcoming these innovators into a culture that prized their contributions and recognized the true value of their work. Through it all, I kept tabs, not out of malice, but because I cared about the people and the industry. I knew that how Meridian handled this crisis would set a precedent for how companies treat innovation and the people behind it. And sadly, the lesson for many inside Meridian was clear. Undervalue your innovators, and you risk losing not just them, but your entire foothold in the market. The fallout wasn't just a business story, it was a human story. Colleagues I'd worked alongside for years facing an uncertain future, a company scrambling to hold on to relevance, and an industry watching closely to see who would rise and who would fall. In that maelstrom, I was reminded why I'd taken every precaution to protect my work. Because when the foundation shakes, those who build it must be ready to stand on their own. When the call came from Titan Dynamics offering me the Chief Innovation Officer position, it felt like a lifeline thrown just when I needed it most. I'd spent over 3 decades at Meridian Technologies, 33 years of dedication, countless late nights, and sacrifices that had defined my life. To be shown the door so abruptly had shaken me, but beneath the initial sting, I had always known that opportunity was waiting elsewhere. Titan Dynamics was a different breed of company. It was smaller, younger, and hungry, not just for market share, but for innovation that would shake up the industry. From my very first conversations with Laura Simmons, Titan's CEO, I could tell she was someone who truly valued vision and creativity. She spoke not in buzzwords, but in passion, about creating a place where innovation was the heartbeat, and where people like me could thrive, free from the corporate red tape that had strangled me at Meridian. On my first day walking into their modern glass-walled headquarters, I was met with an unexpected and humbling welcome. A small group of engineers and project leads stood holding a "Welcome James" banner, their smiles genuine and eager. That moment made me realize this wasn't just another job. It was a fresh start, a new family. The warmth in their eyes and their palpable excitement were a stark contrast to the cold formality I'd experienced at Meridian's sprawling, impersonal campuses. The days that followed were exhilarating and exhausting in equal measure. I dived headfirst into understanding Titan's existing product lineup and identifying where my patented algorithm could make the most impact. Unlike the bureaucracy and cautious risk aversion I'd been mired in before, Titan's culture was electric with possibility. The teams here didn't just accept change, they craved it. They approached every challenge with a "let's figure this out" attitude that reminded me of the early years when innovation was raw and urgent. We kicked off a series of all-hands workshops, bringing engineers, product managers, and business strategists together. The air buzzed with creativity, whiteboards filled with diagrams, heated debates over architecture decisions, and rapid-fire brainstorming sessions that stretched late into the evening. This was the kind of environment I dreamt of, where ideas flowed freely and collaboration was the norm. Within a few weeks, the initial integration of my algorithm showed tangible results. We boosted data processing speeds by nearly 30%, increased system reliability, and cut operational costs significantly. Clients noticed, and so did the market. Titan Dynamics began to shed its image as an underdog, evolving into a serious contender. Every product release, every press mention, reinforced the momentum we were building. But the real victory went beyond metrics. For the first time in years, I felt truly heard and respected. At Meridian, my ideas were often sidelined or watered down by layers of management fixated on short-term profits. Here, my leadership was welcomed and my vision embraced. Laura gave me the autonomy to push boundaries, to take calculated risks, and to challenge the status quo. It was a refreshing change, one that reinvigorated my passion for innovation. Joining Titan also meant reuniting with former colleagues who had quietly followed my lead after my departure. Many had resigned from Meridian, disillusioned and uncertain, but ready to fight for a company that valued their expertise. Together, we weren't just transferring skills, we were rebuilding a culture of innovation, trust, and mutual respect. The camaraderie was palpable, like a band of pioneers setting out into uncharted territory. Public reaction was swift. Industry media picked up the story of my move and Titan's rising prominence. I found myself speaking at conferences, giving interviews, and participating in podcasts where I could share my vision for a future where intellectual property was fiercely protected and inventors were recognized as the true drivers of progress. It was surreal to see how quickly the narrative shifted, from being the dismissed executive to a celebrated innovator shaping the industry's future. In the quiet moments, I often reflected on the irony of it all. The very technology that Meridian tried to downplay was now the foundation of Titan's growth. The company that had dismissed me was scrambling to catch up while we surged ahead. It wasn't just a professional triumph, it was a personal vindication, a proof that foresight, resilience, and integrity could turn a painful ending into a powerful new beginning. As I settled into my role, I realized that this chapter wasn't just about technology or market success. It was about reclaiming my identity as a creator and leader. The sense of purpose I felt walking into Titan's doors was unlike anything I'd experienced in years. I was no longer just a cog in a corporate machine. I was a catalyst for change, surrounded by a team that believed in the same mission. Looking forward, I knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. There would be challenges, competitors, and inevitable setbacks. But for the first time in a long time, I was confident, not just in the technology or the strategy, but in the people and the culture we were building. Together, we were setting the stage for something extraordinary. And so, with a deep breath and steady heart, I embraced this new chapter, ready to lead Titan Dynamics into the future we'd all dreamed of. A future where innovation was celebrated, valued, and fiercely protected. The call from Meridian's legal department wasn't a total surprise, but it still carried a weight that I hadn't fully anticipated. It came about 3 months after I had officially joined Titan Dynamics and started making serious headway with the technology I'd spent decades developing. Meridian's message was clear but tentative. They wanted to discuss licensing my patented innovations. What I heard beneath those formal words was a company that had finally realized just how indispensable my work was. For years, Meridian had treated my contributions as company property, glossing over the fact that I had personally developed the improvements and even secured patents in my name before I left. Their oversight, or perhaps deliberate disregard, of my intellectual property had cost them dearly, and now they were looking for a way to fix things without admitting fault publicly. That was going to be the sticking point. I remember sitting in Titan's conference room with Greg Sullivan, Titan's CEO. Our legal team gathered around the polished oak table. The initial offer from Meridian was low, well below what my team and I estimated the true value of the technology. More galling, the offer carefully avoided any mention of me as the inventor, phrasing the deal in purely corporate terms, as if my role had been negligible or incidental. That was a slap in the face. I wasn't about to accept that. I leaned back in my chair, recalling the countless late nights and weekends spent meticulously documenting every line of code, every algorithmic breakthrough, and every conceptual leap that went into that software. I had quietly and carefully patented the technology well before my exit, anticipating that one day I might have to defend it. That foresight was my shield now. Greg looked over, his eyes meeting mine with understanding. "We're not just protecting a piece of tech here, James. We're protecting the principle that inventors deserve respect. Let's make sure Meridian understands that." Our legal team drafted a counter-proposal that was unambiguous and firm. We demanded a licensing fee at least triple the standard industry rate, reflecting not only the direct value of the technology, but also the intangible worth of the years of dedicated research and innovation I had invested. More importantly, we insisted on public acknowledgement of my role as the original inventor, requiring Meridian to formally credit me in all future references to the technology. When Meridian's lawyers received our terms, the tone of their communication shifted. The initial bravado gave way to a defensive posture. They balked, especially at the public recognition clause. Their letters hinted at concerns about brand image, shareholder reaction, and internal morale. They wanted the technology license without reopening old wounds or exposing past managerial mistakes. But I stood firm. This wasn't about grudges or petty revenge. It was about fairness and setting a precedent that innovation could not be erased or ignored. My story was bigger than Meridian. It was about every engineer who had ever been sidelined, every creator who had been reduced to a footnote. Weeks passed in a tense standoff. Negotiations stretched on, punctuated by meetings and calls that were sometimes cordial, sometimes fraught with underlying friction. I kept reminding myself, and everyone around me, that this was more than a business deal. It was a battle for respect and recognition in an industry that too often took its innovators for granted. Greg and I had many late-night conversations, strategizing how to leverage this moment to benefit not just ourselves, but the larger tech community. We understood that a precedent here could influence how companies treat their inventors for years to come. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Meridian relented. The final agreement was a landmark. They agreed to pay the licensing fee we requested and to publicly acknowledge me as the creator of the patented technology. The press release was carefully worded but clear, an official recognition that had once seemed impossible. The announcement sent ripples through the industry. Trade journals, tech blogs, and business publications dissected the deal. Many hailed it as a turning point in how intellectual property and inventorship were valued in corporate America. The story of a veteran engineer who refused to be erased resonated widely. Inside Titan Dynamics, the deal became a badge of honor. We used it to reinforce our culture, one that prized innovation, credited creators, and nurtured talent. The licensing agreement wasn't just a contract. It was a symbol of what could be achieved when integrity and foresight met courage and persistence. Looking back, the licensing battle was one of the toughest challenges I'd faced, not because of the legal complexity, but because it forced me to stand up against a powerful corporation's inertia and pride. It required patience, strategy, and unwavering belief in the value of my work. But it was worth it. That battle reshaped my legacy and sent a powerful message. No matter how long you've been overlooked or underestimated, with preparation and resolve, you can reclaim your story, your rights, and your rightful place in the history of innovation. It's hard to put into words what it felt like to stand on that stage at the National Innovation Summit exactly 1 year after Meridian let me go. When I was first told my position was terminated, I never imagined I'd be back here, front and center, recognized not just as a technologist, but as a leader who helped reshape an entire industry's approach to intellectual property and innovation. The journey from that cold boardroom at Meridian to this packed auditorium wasn't just about personal vindication. It was about proving that respecting innovation and the people behind it isn't just the right thing to do, it's good business. That year at Titan Dynamics had been nothing short of transformative. Our new product lines, built on the patented enhancements I'd developed over decades, didn't just perform well, they disrupted the market. Customers who had grown frustrated with Meridian's stagnation flocked to us, eager for fresh ideas and real progress. At Titan, innovation was not a buzzword, it was a commitment. We fostered a culture where engineers were empowered to take risks, and every breakthrough was celebrated, documented, and protected. Seeing that culture take root and flourish was deeply satisfying. But the real milestone came when Titan's market valuation surpassed Meridian's for the first time ever. I remember the day Greg handed me that quarterly report, champagne in hand, a mix of disbelief and pride shining in his eyes. We toasted not just a financial victory, but a triumph of principles. When I took the stage, the room was filled with industry leaders, journalists, and young developers hungry for inspiration. I shared not just the technical story of the algorithm, but the broader message. Innovation isn't anonymous. It comes from real people, dedicated, passionate, often unheralded individuals who deserve recognition and respect. After the keynote, I was approached by dozens of young engineers, many of them women, who told me my story had changed how they approached their own work. As I left the summit that day, the applause ringing in my ears, I felt a deep sense of peace. After all the struggles, all the battles fought quietly behind the scenes and loudly in the boardrooms, I had finally carved out a space where innovation and the people who drive it could truly thrive. And that, more than any stock price or patent, was worth every step of the journey.